everyone, and welcome to Narratives. For those of you that are new to this channel, in our last video we did some research and we made predictions for Apple's WWDC 2025, an annual software development conference. Since then, we've actually seen WWDC, and we've seen a few interesting things that we should talk about. And let's begin with material liquid glass. Now, with material liquid glass, this is actually the first major redesign coming to iOS since iOS 7. And design is something that is very subjectively received. For example, I've already seen some reviews on the internet that are kind of negative towards it, but I've also seen some other reviews that are not so negative. And myself, I also started out in the negative space. I did not like how everything looked really shiny and glossy, and it was a little weird for my taste. But since then, I've started to use the betas on my personal devices. And I have to say that in that time, I think the update is starting to grow on me a little bit. I do actually like how everything is slightly redone and reorganized. It's also worth mentioning that I've noticed this update in more places and more often than I expected it to be. So when Apple says that this update covers the entire system, they actually mean a lot of what they say. And I do hear some people's complaints with readability in this new liquid glass redesign, but I do think that can be tackled with the betas that are going to roll out this summer. One of the features that are actually coming to this redesigned iOS this year include a redesigned lock screen. And a major part of that redesign actually is about the time. The time can now adapt its weight, width, and height to fit in with all kinds of photos. Now, in its full length mode, the time might appear a little jarring to some people, but I actually kind of like it. The time is also now dynamic now, so when you're interacting with the lock screen, for example, when you swipe up to see your notifications, the time will also dynamically adjust itself, so you see less of the time and more of the rest of the screen. Next, we have a new camera app this year, and everything gets even simpler this time. All of the controls are limited and held back to emphasize just two controls, photo mode and video mode. You can see all of the other modes by simply swiping left and right on the mode switch panel. You can also see all of the controls for each mode by swiping up on the same panel. The resolution controls are all bundled up together into a button at the top left corner of the screen. I do like how everything is slightly easier to navigate. Everything's a little bit more spaced out and easier to click on. However, it is also important to note that everything does seem like there's an additional step to get to everything. For example, you have to swipe up to see the controls, and you have to click on the button to actually see all of the resolution options. So while it's easier to navigate, it's also important that people understand that these controls are available for them to use beyond just photo and video and the simpler options. Also, within phone calls, we now have call screening. Basically, when someone calls you, your phone will automatically start recording a live transcript of the conversation. When the caller shares their name and their purpose, that's when your phone will ring you. Then you can check the live transcript and see whether or not you want to pick up the phone or drop it. This is a feature that has already been on Android for quite a long time. Apple, about damn time. Also coming to phone calls is hold assist. When your phone detects hold music, it will automatically suggest using hold assist. Once you activate the option, then you can leave the call, use your phone as normal, or even stop using your phone. Once the hold is over, your phone will ring you again, and then you can pick up wherever you left off. Another feature that has already been on Android, another feature, Apple, about damn time. And then finally, we also have live translations for messages, FaceTimes, and phone calls. The messages version seems pretty interesting and fairly usable without much additional disruption. Even the FaceTime one seems pretty workable, but the phone call version seemed a little weird because, first of all, in order to see the live translation of the conversation, you can't hold up the phone to your ear. So you either have to use speaker mode or you have to play it into your ears. All right. Then, once you start the conversation, there's a lag time because the other person has to talk in their language, then it has to translate, and then you hear it in your language, and then you respond, and the same thing happens to your response. So it seems like there's an additional step in each direction, and that has the potential for making conversations seem a little bit more awkward and unnatural. So it will be interesting to see how real people actually decide to use this and how helpful it actually ends up being. In watchOS 26, we also have a few interesting things. To begin with, we now have Workout Buddy. So you start a workout on your Apple Watch, and then for the rest of the workout, you actually have a verbal partner that shares compliments and updates related to the workout for the entire workout. Essentially, what Apple is doing is they're having the watch collect the data, which they send to the iPhone, where the iPhone uses AI to convert the data about the workout into verbal responses, which you interact with as Workout Buddy. Another thing that is interesting about watchOS 26 is the enhancements that they made to the Smart Stacks widget feature. Now, Smart Stacks have already existed in Apple Watches from past watchOS updates, but now the watch actually uses its outboard sensors to get a better understanding about your whereabouts, and then they can use that information to actually give you better widget suggestions within the Smart Stack. I do remember using this feature in like a less intelligent version in like a previous iOS update, but I particularly found this demonstration very interesting because they shared the backtrack widget feature, which is basically the watch is kind of remembering your footsteps and the direction that you walked in case you're in a location that is far away from a cell tower or cell connection. And that example sounds like something that actually has a real use case and could be really helpful for some person in a real trouble situation. So that's why I thought this was really interesting. Finally, another thing that is interesting about watchOS 26 is the wrist flick feature. Basically, if you're getting a notification on your Apple Watch that you don't want to tend to right away, you can just flick your wrist and the notification will dismiss by itself. And that sounds really cool, but there is the potential for accidental wrist flicks, because I've already seen some reviewers talk about their, accidental anecdotes where they just picked up their wrist to look at a notification or look at their Apple Watch, but the Apple Watch, accidentally took that as a wrist flick. So there's that potential as well. I have been really excited for this segment because now within macOS 26, we have shortcuts being plugged into Apple Intelligence, and that sounds like a really powerful move, especially because of the example that they showed on stage with shortcuts filling out a student's notes by going through the lecture video. That sounds really cool, but that looks even more useful for students. Now, they also did expand this entire shortcuts section into Spotlight on steroids. Spotlight is way more powerful now because it can access your applications, your files, your shortcuts, and your clipboard history from virtually any point in the macOS experience. This function is even more powerful because there are some app-specific commands that you can run directly into Spotlight. Some examples include being able to draft emails, use AI to generate new ideas, and moving copy and paste elements in between apps. Now, these functions can be short-keyed so that a shorter acronym can pull up the same function. This acronym can be virtually anything. In all of the examples on stage, they did show this new Spotlight being used only with native Apple apps, But they also did announce an API on stage so that other app developers can also plug in their applications into this powerful spotlight. It is still a little confusing, however, how the random user is supposed to know that so many shortcut or spotlight functions exist. Like, what is the average Mac user supposed to type in to pull up a certain function? Or how do they even know that all of these functions exist? This definitely does raise a question about the feature's discoverability. Moving on with visionOS 26, there are two things that I found particularly interesting about the new experience. The first thing is that personas have a higher quality rendering now, so they look more photorealistic and less cartoony. The second thing is that you can save your Vision Pro credentials on your iPhone, such as your eye measurements and your head measurements, and this allows you to use a headset that isn't yours. This is great for businesses who want to buy a handful of headsets for the entire team. Everyone can share from the same pool of devices. This is kind of synonymous to profiles on a computer or a desktop. Window management looks really cool now on iPads with iPadOS 26. It's parallel to the system that's been being used on the Macs. I would even go as far as to say that it looks a little bit better than the Mac version. That's because when I'm using Macs and I have a window open and I'm trying to open a new window, the previous one automatically recedes back into the Stage Manager view on the side. And that's a little bit annoying when I'm trying to open two windows at the same time. However, from the examples that we saw on stage, it looks like that on the iPad, when you open a new window with an older one already opened, the older one stays where it is regardless of how many new windows you open. So that sounds and looks a little bit better. Initially, I did think that this feature is going to replace Stage Manager because they never mentioned both of them explicitly in the keynote. However, later on, they did show a visual that showed both of them working together. The stoplights in the top left corner of the screen are also coming directly from the Macs. Even the long hold and the window sizing options are coming directly from the Macs. The expose feature on the iPad is coming from older MacBooks, which actually used to have a physical button to show all of the active windows. That button has obviously since been removed. Another interesting thing about iPadOS 26 was the menu bar. However, in the event, they only used menu bar with the keyboard and the trackpad case. So I'm wondering how menu bar works with touch input. Audio isolation also sounded really cool. Me being kind of a creator myself, I hope I get to test this feature out. I wonder if it'll work on an iPhone and older AirPods. If not myself, I hope some other creators get to test this feature out because I really want to see how it works. Last but not least, the background tasks feature also sounded really cool on the iPadOS 26 experience. When I first heard it, I was a little surprised that it didn't already exist, but I guess what's important is that it's here now and it sounds really interesting. You know, it kind of seems like Apple is finally being able to push the software to optimize itself as much as it can with the powered hardware of the iPad. It definitely felt like the iPad was among the headliners for this year's event, and I'll be looking out for the future to see an even more productive iPad. But until we see a completely hulked out iPad, my name is Manit, and this has been Narratives. Thank you for your time, and thank you for watching.